The air was thick with the scent of spilled beer and summer rain when I stumbled out of the bar, my head buzzing louder than the neon signs flickering above. My roommate, Elias, was a step behind me, his laugh cutting through the chaos of the Lower East Side like a blade through fog. In that moment, I didn't know I was about to fall into him, into us, into something I'd spent years pretending I didn't see. We'd been roommates for 2 years, Elias and me, sharing a cramped Brooklyn apartment with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. I'm Caleb, 27, a graphic designer with a knack for overthinking and a habit of dodging anything that felt too real. Elias, 29, was the opposite of freelance photographer with a grin that could disarm a hurricane and eyes that seemed to see straight through my carefully built walls. He was black, confident, with a warmth that made everyone feel like they belonged. And I was just some white guy from Ohio trying to keep up with his orbit. That night, we'd gone out with friends to celebrate Elias's latest gallery show. His photos raw, vivid shots of queer life in the city had drawn a crowd, and the bar was packed with artists, activists, and strangers who became friends by the second round. I'd watched him work the room, all easy charm and quick wit, while I nursed my whiskey and tried not to stare too long at the way his shirt clung to his shoulders. By midnight, we were both a little drunk, the kind of drunk where the world feels softer and secrets start slipping out. "Caleb, you good?" Elias called as we stepped onto the sidewalk, the bar's music fading behind us. His voice was warm, teasing, but there was something else in each question I couldn't quite read. "Yeah, just need air," I mumbled, leaning against a lamppost. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shimmering. I glanced at him, his face half lit by a neon sign that read, "Open." His eyes locked on mine, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. We started walking toward the subway, our steps uneven, our shoulders brushing. The city hummed around us, Stax's honking, a street musician strumming a guitar, laughter spilling from another bar. Elias was talking about his next project, something about capturing the in-between moments of love, but I was barely listening. I was too busy noticing the way his hands moved when he talked, the way his laugh made my chest ache. "You ever think about it?" he asked suddenly, stopping under a flickering streetlight. His tone was different now, quieter, like he was stepping onto thin ice. "Think about what?" I asked, though my heart was already pounding. I knew what he meant. I'd seen the way he looked at me sometimes, late at night when we were sprawled on the couch watching bad movies. I'd felt the weight of his gaze, the unspoken questions hanging between us. But I'd always pushed it away, told myself it was nothing, that I wasn't like that. I wasn't ready to be like that. "Us," he said simply, his eyes searching mine. "What we could be." The world tilted. I opened my mouth to say anything, but nothing came out. Elias stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the cedarwood in his cologne, feel the heat of his breath. My pulse was a drumbeat, loud and relentless. I should have stepped back. I should have laughed it off, made a joke, kept things safe. But I didn't. Instead, I let him pull me close. His hands found my waist, tentative at first, like he was giving me a chance to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. The city faded, the noise, the lights, the strangers had all dissolved until it was just us, standing in the middle of a wet sidewalk, his forehead resting against mine. His lips brushed my ear as he whispered, "Caleb, I've wanted this for so long." And then he kissed me. It wasn't soft or careful. It was hungry, desperate, like he'd been holding it back for years and the dam had finally broken. My hands found his jacket, gripping the leather like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I kissed him back, hard, letting every doubt and fear I'd carried dissolve into the heat of his mouth. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from myself. When we finally pulled apart, gasping, the world came rushing back. A taxi honked. Someone shouted from across the street, and Elias laughed, low and breathless. "Well, damn," he said, his voice rough. "Didn't expect that." I laughed too, but it was shaky, my head spinning with more than just whiskey. "What the hell was that?" I asked, half joking, half terrified. He grinned, his eyes bright under the streetlight. "That," he said, "was the start of something." We didn't talk much on the subway ride home. I kept stealing glances at him, his profile sharp against the flickering train lights. My mind was a mess. Part of me wanted to bolt, to pretend that kiss never happened, to go back to the safety of being just roommates. But another part, the part that felt alive for the first time in years, wanted to dive in head first. Consequences be damned. When we got back to our apartment, the air felt different, charged. Elias tossed his keys on the counter, his movements casual, but his eyes locked on me. "You okay?" he asked, leaning against the kitchen counter, his voice soft but serious. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was. My whole life, I'd been the guy who played it safe, who followed the script. College job, straight, predictable. But standing there, looking at Elias, I realized I didn't want the script anymore. I wanted him. "I'm more than okay," I said finally, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. I stepped toward him, closing the distance between us. His eyes widened, just for a second, before that familiar grin spread across his face. "Good," he said, reaching for me again. "Because we're just getting started." The morning after the kiss, our apartment felt like a stranger's house. The same chipped mug sat in the sink. The same creaky floorboards groaned underfoot. But everything was different because I was different. I woke up with Elias's name on my lips, my heart racing like I'd just run a marathon. I found him in the kitchen, humming to himself as he brewed coffee. He was shirtless, his dark skin catching the morning light filtering through our grimy window. For a second, I just stood there, watching the way his shoulders moved, the way his curls fell over his forehead. Last night's kiss replayed in my head, vivid, electric, terrifying. I wanted to say something, to acknowledge the shift between us, but my tongue felt heavy, my thoughts a tangled mess. "Morning, Caleb," Elias said without turning around, his voice warm and teasing. "You gonna stand there staring, or come get some coffee?" I laughed, the sound breaking the tension in my chest. "Didn't know you were psychic," I said, stepping into the kitchen. I grabbed a mug, my hands brushing his as he passed me the pot. The contact sent a jolt through me, and I saw his lips twitch, like he felt it too. We sat at our tiny kitchen table, sipping coffee in silence. It wasn't awkward, exactly, but it was heavy, like we were both waiting for the other to make the next move. I kept glancing at him, trying to read his face. Was he regretting last night? Did he feel the same pull I did? The same mix of fear and want? "So," Elias said finally, leaning back in his chair. His eyes were steady, searching. "You want to talk about it?" I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my mug. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted. "Last night, I didn't plan for that." He chuckled, low and soft. "Neither did I. But I'm not sorry it happened." His words hit me like a wave, washing away some of my doubt. "Me neither," I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. "But I don't know what this means. For me. For us." Elias leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "It means whatever we want it to mean, Caleb. No pressure, no rush. Just us figuring it out. His calm was infectious, but it didn't erase the questions swirling in my head. I'd spent my whole life dodging this part of myself. The part that noticed guys like Elias. The part that felt something when our hands brushed or when he smiled at me. Growing up in Ohio, I'd learned early to keep those feelings locked away, to play the part of the straight guy everyone expected. But now, with Elias sitting across from me, his eyes soft and open, I didn't want to hide anymore. That day, we fell into our usual routine, sketching logos on my laptop. Elias editing photos at the desk across the room, but the air between us crackled with something new. Every glance, every casual touch, felt like a spark. By afternoon, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying the kiss, the way his hands felt on my waist, the way his voice sounded when he said he'd wanted me for so long. "Caleb," Elias said suddenly, looking up from his laptop. "You're staring again." I flushed. Caught. "Sorry. Just thinking." "About me?" he asked, his grin playful but his eyes serious. "Yeah," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "About you." He stood, crossing the room in 3 strides, and sat on the edge of my desk. "Good thoughts or bad thoughts?" he asked, his voice low. "Good," I said, my heart pounding. "Really good." He reached out, his fingers brushing my jaw, and I leaned into his touch without thinking. "You're killing me. You know that," he said, his voice rough with something that made my stomach flip. "I've been trying to play it cool, but you're making it real hard." I laughed, shaky but real. "You're not exactly making it easy for me either." That night, we went out again, not to a bar, but to a quiet diner on the corner of our street. We sat in a booth by the window, splitting a plate of fries and talking about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up in Atlanta, about the first time he realized he was queer, about the fear and freedom of coming out. I told him about Ohio, about the weight of expectations, about the part of me I'd buried for so long. "You ever think about telling anyone?" he asked, dipping a fry in ketchup. "Your family, I mean." I shrugged, my chest tightening. "Not really. They're traditional. I don't know if they'd get it." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You don't have to tell them until you're ready. But when you are, I'll be there. If you want." His words settled into me, warm and steady, like an anchor in a storm. I reached across the table, my hand finding his. "Thanks," I said, and for the first time, I felt like I could breathe. The next few weeks were a blur of discovery. Elias and I fell into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, like we'd been orbiting each other for years and only now collided. We didn't put a label on it, boyfriends, partners, whatever, but we didn't need to. It was in the way he kissed me good morning, the way I caught myself smiling when he walked into a room. But it wasn't all easy. The world outside our apartment wasn't always kind. One night, we were walking home from a movie, holding hands, when a guy on the corner muttered something ugly under his breath. I froze, my hand tightening in Elias's. But he just squeezed back and kept walking, his jaw tight, but his eyes steady. "Don't let it get to you," he said later, when we were back home. "People like Thathy just loud. Doesn't mean they're right." I nodded, but the words lingered, stirring up old fears. What if this was a mistake? What if I wasn't strong enough to live this way, to face the judgment, the stares? Elias seemed so sure, so unafraid, but I was still finding my footing. One afternoon, I got a call from my sister, Hannah. She was visiting New York for work and wanted to meet up. My stomach churned at the thought of her seeing me with Elias, of explaining something I barely understood myself. But Elias, as always, saw right through me. You don't have to tell her anything, he said, sitting next to me on the couch. But if you want to, I'm here. I decided to meet Hannah alone, at a cafe near her hotel. She was her usual self, chatty, warm, asking about my job, my life. But when she mentioned mom and dad, asking if I'd be home for Thanksgiving, I felt the weight of everything I wasn't saying. You okay, Caleb? She asked, her brow furrowing. You seem off. I hesitated, my heart pounding. I'm good, I said finally. Just figuring some stuff out. She didn't push, but her eyes lingered on me, like she knew there was more. When I got home, Elias was waiting, his camera in hand, editing photos from a shoot. He looked up, his expression soft. How'd it go? I shrugged, dropping onto the couch next to him. Fine. Didn't tell her anything. He nodded, setting his camera down. You'll know when you're ready. No rush. But the truth was, I wanted to be ready. I wanted to be as brave as he was, to walk through the world with my head high, unafraid of who I loved. That night, as we lay in bed, his arm draped over my chest, I felt a flicker of that courage. It wasn't loud or bold, but it was there, growing stronger every day. The first real test came a month later. Elias got invited to a queer art festival in Manhattan, and he asked me to come with him not as his roommate, but as his date. The idea thrilled me and terrified me in equal measure. I'd never been to something so openly, unapologetically queer, and the thought of standing there, holding his hand in front of hundreds of strangers, made my palms sweat. You don't have to decide now, Elias said, his voice gentle. But I'd love to have you there. I spent days agonizing over it, torn between wanting to be there for him and fearing what it would mean to step so fully into this new version of myself. In the end, I said yes not because I was fearless, but because I couldn't bear the thought of letting him down. The festival was a riot of color and sound drag queens strutting through the crowd, poets reciting love letters on a makeshift stage, artists selling prints under rainbow banners. Elias's photos were on display in a small gallery tent, each one a snapshot of love and resilience. I stood beside him as he talked to visitors, his passion lighting up the space. I felt proud, but also exposed, like everyone could see the truth written on my face. At one point, a woman with bright pink hair approached us, her eyes flicking between me and Elias. You two are adorable, she said, grinning. How long have you been together? I froze, my mouth dry, but Elias just laughed, slinging an arm around my shoulders. Not long, he said smoothly. But it's been worth the wait. Her smile widened, and she moved on, but I was still reeling. Together. The word felt huge, final, like a door swinging open. Elias glanced at me, his arm still around me. You okay? He whispered. Yeah, I said, and this time, I meant it. I leaned into him, letting the warmth of his body ground me. For the first time, I didn't care who was watching. That night, back at our apartment, we celebrated with cheap wine and takeout, sprawled on the couch like we'd done 100 times before. But now, there was no space between us, no pretending. I kissed him, slow and deliberate, savoring the way he tasted like wine and possibility. You were amazing today, I said, my voice muffled against his neck. So were you, he replied, his fingers tracing circles on my back. You showed up. That's everything. Thanksgiving loomed like a storm cloud. My parents expected me home, and Hannah had already texted twice to confirm my flight. The idea of going back to Ohio, of sitting at their table and pretending I was the same Caleb they'd always known. Felt like a betrayal not just of Elias, but of myself. I told Elias about it one night, my voice shaking as I admitted how scared I was. I don't know how to do this, I said. I don't know how to tell them. He listened, his hand resting on mine. You don't have to tell them anything you're not ready for, he said. But if you want to, I'll go with you. Be your backup. The thought of Elias in my parents' house, with its floral wallpaper and framed Bible verses, was both comforting and terrifying. But I nodded, because the idea of facing it alone was worse. We flew out together the day before Thanksgiving. The plane ride was quiet, Elias sketching in a notebook while I stared out the window, my stomach in knots. When we landed, my parents were waiting at the airport, their smiles warm but cautious when they saw Elias. Caleb's roommate, my mom said, shaking his hand. It's so nice to finally meet you. Elias grinned, all charm. Thanks for having me, Mrs. Harper. Dinner that night was tense, at least for me. My parents were polite, asking Elias about his photography, but I could feel their questions, the unspoken curiosity about why I'd brought him. Hannah kept glancing at me, her eyes sharp, like she was piecing something together. After dinner, Elias and I escaped to the backyard, sitting on the old swing set where I used to spend hours as a kid. The air was cold, the stars bright above us. You're doing great, Elias said, nudging my shoulder. I feel like I'm gonna puke, I admitted, and he laughed, pulling me close. You're braver than you think, he said, his voice soft. You're here. That's enough for now. Thanksgiving morning. I woke up early, my nerves frayed. Elias was still asleep, his arms slung over my waist in the guest room's narrow bed. I watched him for a moment, his face peaceful, and felt a surge of gratitude. Whatever happened today, he was here. At breakfast, my mom asked about our plans, her tone light but probing. You two seem close, she said, stirring her coffee. Like brothers. Almost. I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. Elias glanced at me, his expression calm but encouraging. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering. Not exactly, I said, my voice steady despite the panic. Elias is. He's more than that. He's my boyfriend. The room went silent. My mom's spoon clattered against her mug. My dad's eyes widened, then narrowed. Hannah just stared, her mouth slightly open. Caleb, my mom said finally, her voice tight. What are you saying? I'm saying I love him, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. I'm queer. And I'm with Elias. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. My dad stood, his chair scraping against the floor, and walked out of the room. My mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Hannah reached for my hand, squeezing it hard. I'm proud of you, she whispered, and I clung to her words like a lifeline. Elias stayed quiet, but his presence was enough, steady and warm beside me. Later, as we packed to leave early, he pulled me into a hug. You did it, he said. You were so damn brave. I don't know if it was worth it, I said, my voice breaking. They hate me. They don't, he said firmly. They're just scared. Give them time. Back in Brooklyn, the weight of Thanksgiving lingered, but Elias was my anchor. We spent days talking, laughing, rebuilding what felt broken. He showed me his latest photos, portraits of us taken at the festival, our faces lit with something I hadn't seen in myself before: hope. One night, as we lay on the roof of our building, the city sprawling below us, I turned to him. I don't know what's next, I said. but I know I want it with you. He smiled, his hand finding mine. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. Months later, I got a letter from Hannah. She said Mom was asking questions, trying to understand. Dad was quieter, but he hadn't shut the door. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Elias and I kept building our life messy. Real. Ours. We fought sometimes, over dumb things like dishes or bigger things like fear. But we always came back to each other, to the promise we'd made that night on the sidewalk. Love, I learned, wasn't about being fearless. It was about showing up, even when you're scared, even when the world pushes back. It was about choosing each other, every day, in the in-between moments that Elias loved to capture. And as I lay beside him, his heartbeat steady under my hand, I knew I'd keep choosing him, no matter what came next.